How's that for sound? Good. Okay, I'm Shane Fontaine. I'm one of the co-founders of Hop, and I will dive right in. So Hop is a bridge, like Mason said, and the idea is to make it as simple and easy to use as possible. And so that right there, what you see is basically the whole Hop interface. And so we tried to model it a little bit after Uniswap. And the idea is you can send assets from any chain, any layer 2 that we support to layer 1 and back and forth. And so what you're looking at there is the interface. And if you were to use Hop today, all you do at the top is select an asset, and then you would choose the chain you're trying to send to. And so in this example, it's sending from Optimism to XDAI. You click send, and you wait maybe a minute or two, basically how long the chain takes for finality, and your funds will show up on the other chain. And so it is super smooth. We think it works really well. And I'm going to dive into why the bridges are needed in the first place, and then kind of what advantage Hop has, or what Hop brought to the table, and kind of talk through the technical side of how Hop works. So what you're looking at here, so everything's going to be pictures, no words, so you can just listen to me. But what you're looking at here is kind of how Ethereum works without any bridges. And so Ethereum right now, you all know it as you transact on it. If you really need, you can go to another chain and transact for cheaper, or whatever other features they offer. But what you're looking at here is how Ethereum connects to other chains. And the idea is that every chain is only connected to Ethereum. And so you have Ethereum, and then if you're going to transact on Optimism, for example, you send money to Optimism, but once you're on Optimism, you can't, for example, go easily to Arbitrum. And so this is what the model looks like right now, but with bridges, you can almost imagine that between all those layer 2s up top, there are very fluid connections that allow you to transact between layers instead of going one chain back to the main chain and then back to another chain. And so that's the big advantage of bridges, not just Hop, but pretty much every bridge that exists today allows some form of that. And it's really needed, and I'll go into why now. And so how bridges work, or how different chains work now, is a lot of them have canonical messengers. And so what that means is when you send money to and from a bridge, it goes over their message chain, or their kind of protocol, and your funds arrive on each chain. And so you can see kind of the image there, so that you can imagine the bottom is Ethereum, the top is Optimism, for example. And when you send a transaction, it kind of flows from you over to the other chain and then back to yourself on the other chain. That works pretty well. It uses the canonical bridge. However, this next slide is coming the other way. So if you want to go from layer 2 back to layer 1, then because of some of the mechanics of how these different chains work, sometimes it takes a long time. And so you can see the only real big difference with this picture here is that there's an extra week period to wait to get your funds on layer 1. And so, for example, right now, if you were to use Optimism and you were to send money from Optimism to mainnet, it would take 7 days. And that's basically an eternity in this world. So it doesn't really work well. And so that's basically the current model. I think bridges, or different chains, were designed with this in mind, and they kind of have to do it this way for their security. And so that is what kind of how a lot of these bridges work. I'm sorry, these chains work today. And then additionally, you'll see, I guess, in the first picture before this, but you can't, again, transfer between two different chains. And so now diving into how Hop works, from a very high level, like I said earlier, you can send assets from layer 1 to layer 2 or layer 2 to layer 2 pretty seamlessly. It just takes a few minutes. And how that works, I'm going to dive into how you go from layer 2 to layer 2. And so what you're looking at here is you can think of, on one side is an Arbitrum, and on the other side is the Optimism chain. And you are that same person on both sides. And so when you send a transaction from Arbitrum to Optimism on Hop, you will get about, say you send $5, you will get about $5 on the other side. And the way this works is because Hop has created effectively a new asset that kind of lives between the chains. We call it the H asset. So for ETH, for example, right here you can see there's an HETH representation, and effectively one ETH is worth one HETH. And the idea is when you send assets from one chain to another, the asset goes into the Hop AMM on one chain. It swaps your ETH for HETH, and then once it does that, the Hop bridges own the HETH asset. And then so on one chain, it burns that HETH, and then you could see that basically the Hop bridge contract on the bottom there. And then on the other bridge, it will effectively mint that new asset and then swap it back for ETH and then give it back to the recipient. And so put very simply to the user, all you see is ETH on one side, ETH on the other side. But what's happening in practice is you swap your ETH for HETH, the HETH goes, burns and mints, and then on the other side, it swaps back for ETH. And so at a pretty high level, that is what's going on with Hop. A lot of bridges have differences of opinion there, or differences of implementation. And so it's pretty, that's one way, and we think it's pretty good. And then this gets a little more complicated, but what this is showing is that there is a lot of Hop is very hub and spoke in that Ethereum is like the main chain, and a lot of everything that happens on Hop kind of gets checkpointed onto layer 1, onto Ethereum. And so what this is showing is what happens behind the scenes, more or less, if you're when you send from one chain to another. So again, on one side is Optimism, the other side is Arbitrum. In this one, you can see that ETH is burned, like I was mentioning, or HETH. So in practice, you see the same thing, that the user is getting funds from one side to the other. But how Hop works is on top of the transferring of assets, Hop kind of checkpoints all of the state that has been sent through the protocol onto layer 1. And so what you can see in this picture that is different than the last one is that the state of the first chain is being checkpointed onto layer 1 down below. And what that does is allow us to kind of rely on Ethereum's state to verify these messages. And if anyone tries to cheat or defraud people, they have to basically say that Ethereum is wrong. And really, you can't do that given how these chains work. And so Hop's kind of, call it their secret sauce, is being able to rely on layer 1 as the way to kind of the way to verify that everything does work as expected. And then there's one more piece very similar to what I just described, is how it's checkpointing the state. But this is kind of a practical example where that shows Hop's more efficient than basically more efficient than people just sending transfers over on their own. But what you can see in this picture is, again, one more time, it's Optimism and Arbitrum on one side. And what happens here is that Hop kind of takes a bunch of different transactions and hashes them all into a root. And so that little diagram you see at the top basically says, here's 4 different transactions. We, instead of inefficiently transacting all of them to layer 1, Hop kind of takes all 4 of those. And in reality, Hop takes up to 512 of them, I think, or more in theory. But we take all of them, we hash them all into one single hash, which is pretty efficient, and then that's what gets sent to layer 1. And in order to cheat, again, you have to prove that hash is wrong, and technically that's impossible. And so what this is showing is basically that Hop basically takes a Merkle root of all the transactions and sends them off to layer 1. And then, so wrapping back to the original interface, what you can see is pretty much everything that was described. One thing that you'll probably notice now is that when you're sending from Optimism to XDAI, in this case, you send 5 USDC. On the other side, you get 4.999. This is due to 2 things, actually. There's a small fee associated with the transfer to kind of keep the system secure, as you'd probably expect. And then it also, as I mentioned, it goes through the Hop AMM. So ETH gets transferred to HETH, and then it does that in the AMM, and there's some slippage there, either positive or negative. And so what you're seeing there is a little bit of negative slippage where you sent $5 and what you actually got is $4.99. That's pretty typical in the system, and sometimes you'll end up getting $5.01, and sometimes you'll end up getting $4.99. So, and there's actually been a lot of arbitrageurs that have been using the system and helping the protocol out in that way. So, I think that's pretty much all I got. But anyway, if you haven't used Hop, go for it. We think it's a pretty smooth experience. I think a lot of the bridges are doing really well these days, but we like to think ours is pretty good too. So.